The fighters of the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine continue to successfully carry out tasks in the Kursk region of Russia. As reported by the Special Operations Forces, only on Saturday, April 26, a group from the 73rd Center in Kursk region destroyed an entire group of servicemen from the 810th Marine Brigade of the Russian Armed Forces during special operations. As a result, the Special Operations Forces operators also forced 2 enemy soldiers to surrender. The Special Operations Forces soldiers evacuated 1 prisoner of war to a safe place on a stretcher, while the other hobbled along on his own, the report says. At the same time, Special Operations Forces showed a video of the fighters working. While Chief of the Russian General Staff Gerasimov reports on the liberation of Kursk Oblast from Ukraine's security and defense forces, operators of the 73rd Center of the Special Operations Forces continue to successfully complete missions in this region. Just yesterday, a group from the 73rd Special Operations Forces Center wiped out an entire enemy group during special actions in Kursk Oblast. The mission continues, the report says. On April 26, Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin was informed that the last settlement in Kursk Oblast, Gornal, had allegedly been liberated from Ukrainian forces. Reports indicating that hostilities in Russia's Kursk Oblast have ended are untrue, the Ukrainian Armed Forces General Staff has stated. The Ukrainian Defense Forces continue their defensive operation in designated areas of Kursk Oblast. The operational situation remains difficult, but our units are holding their positions and carrying out their assigned tasks, inflicting effective fire on the enemy with all types of weapons and employing active defense tactics. 5 enemy assaults have been repelled in the Kursk operational area since the beginning of the day, with another engagement currently underway.
Ukrainian sources report that the Ukrainian military political leadership has set a new task for the Ukrainian armed forces to capture Russian regions. This task is as follows: to hold the border territory of the Kursk and Belgorod regions until at least the end of April, and at most until the period following May the 9th. What are these dates determined by? The first is related to Trump's promises to achieve peace within 100 days of his presidency. Trump's first presidential 100 days expire on April the 30th. Russian media says that Ukraine wants to ensure that if some agreement is actually signed by that time, it could be declared that it was not the Russian army that drove the Ukrainian armed forces out of the Kursk and Belgorod regions, but that they themselves left there. Even though at the moment we are talking about a total of approximately 24 square kilometers of territory in the 2 regions. The second date is, of course, connected with the 80th anniversary of the Soviet Union's victory in the Great Patriotic War. And on that day, a military parade will be held in Moscow, attended by leaders of a number of foreign states, including the leader of NATO and EU member Slovakia. Russian media says that Zelenski's team, which is trying to organize a get-together in Kiev with actual proof of ignoring the results of World War II and the decisions of the Nuremberg Tribunal, will organize a PR campaign on that day on the fact that the Ukrainian armed forces are still present on the recognized territory of the Russian Federation. The fighting is taking place within the boundaries of the settlements of Gornal and Oleshnya in the Kursk region. In Gornal, the Ukrainian armed forces are trying to hold on to the heights that run along the northern bank of the Psel River. Ukraine fully controls any of these villages. Recently, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said for the first time that Ukrainian forces are operating in the southwestern Russia's Belgorod region. Belgorod, which borders Ukraine, is regularly targeted by Ukrainian airstrikes and lies near Russia's Kursk region, where Kyiv launched a surprise incursion last year and has since fought to maintain a foothold. It is the first time since Russia's full-scale invasion more than 3 years ago that Zelensky has explicitly acknowledged Ukrainian operations in Belgorod, a region with a population of about 1.5 million. US President Donald Trump has not lifted any sanctions against Russia. Permission to strike ATACMS on Russian territory has not been cancelled, and the use of Western weapons continues. And the launched process of reducing oil prices is even worse for Russia than any tariffs. Political and economic expert Taras Zagorodny said this in an interview with Glavred, talking about why the American president is putting pressure only on Ukraine and not on Moscow. According to Zagorodny, Trump is hitting the axis of evil. China and Iran understand the logic of the Americans and the reasons why they are running around Russia. The Americans' worst nightmare is the collapse of Russia. They have always been busy saving Russia, but the good news is that they never saved the Soviet Union, and the USSR was a more powerful country than the current Russian Federation. The US is proceeding from the logic of war with China. They want Russia to support them in this war, or at least maintain neutrality, says Zagorodny. However, according to the expert, an even worse nightmare for Americans is a common border with China along the Bering Strait. After all, everything is heading towards China appearing in the Arctic. Now China is separated from the States by the Pacific Ocean, and it will be separated only by the Bering Strait, and from Alaska, which has no land routes with other US states. Pressure on Canada is also part of the games and the war with China. How to defend Alaska if there is no land route of communication? It goes through Canada. Plus, Canada is a reserve of mineral resources for the war with China, says Zagorodny. According to him, the United States will come to the understanding that Russia cannot be torn away from China, and to the common sense that it is necessary to negotiate with China on how to divide Russia. It won't work any other way. Russia is the weak link. It can't stop the war for many reasons. The price of oil is falling. China won't let Russia be torn from the Chinese embrace. As the Chinese say to Russia, "We are with you forever," but they don't specify that it is possible to be friends with Russia in parts. Why does China need Moscow to pump oil in Siberia? Therefore, China may well understand that it doesn't need Russia because it threatens Europe, China's business partner. Oil, timber and everything else can be exported from Russia without Moscow. Thus, China can support the freedom-loving people of Buryatia or the Altai territory or Tuva, the expert says. In his opinion, Russia is now under a triple blow: the collapse of oil prices, China, which does not need such a Russia, Turkey, which has its own wishes regarding the Turkic world that stretches to the Pacific Ocean because the Yakuts are also a Turkic world, and plus Ukraine, which God himself ordered to destroy Russia. This is the right dream of Ukrainians. In such a configuration, nothing will stick, no matter how anyone tries to blackmail Ukraine. If Russia were not pressured, then the Russians would not be so nervous, but would calmly say that there will be no truce. But Russia is nervous because there is pressure. I emphasize that the policy of protecting US interests automatically hits Russia, Zagorodny said.